And I will show my screen. Slideshow. All right, so we
Thank
are
you.
ready to get started here. So again, welcome to everyone. This is season 7 of Environmental Fridays. It is personal. Um, this is the link to our website here, www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. Um, this season 7, we are going to have a total of 15 episodes, 16 guest speakers. And today in particular, we have 2 guest speakers. So that's why we have 16 instead of 15. Our speakers come from a wide variety of places, as you could see here, Atlanta to Trinidad to Tobago, New York, and so on. And so if you also want to connect to our website by QR code, you could see it there at the bottom right. This month of October, so far we've had well, one presentation didn't go through, but we've had um, a presentation last week, Friday, by Derek, dealing with global warming and coral reef bleaching. Today, we will talk about and hear about the future farm from Michael and Art. Next week, we will have a talk by a chief, the chief of First Peoples based in Trinidad, and he is actually associated with an administration of the Caribbean First Peoples. So he could speak to First Peoples throughout the Caribbean. So that's coming up next week. I have received email from Mark that he is having some technical difficulties and is on some emergency, unable to be our host today. So we will go straight into introducing our 2 speakers for today. I believe the order is first we'll hear from Art Jones. He'll play a film for us. Art Jones, I'm just going to give a small snippet because their full entire bio is in our email announcements. Art Jones is a writer, director, producer. He heads Great Jones Production in New York, and he makes films to engender change. That's what we are all about here, trying to bring awareness and bring change. He's a graduate of Brown University and taught film for 11 years at Hunter. He will be followed by Michael. Michael is an award-winning architect, industrial designer, author, organic farmer, and he specializes in advanced building systems, and you will hear a lot about what that means today. He was educated at University of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania, and in 2023 was awarded the Marcus Who's Who Albert Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award. So those are brief introductions to our speakers today. So at this point, I will stop sharing. Art could share, and we'll get going.
Okay. Would you like me to say a few words or should I just roll the film? Because the film kind of does introduce things.
Do you?
I'm going to do me. All right. So I'm just going to say simply, Desmond, thank you very much for putting this together. And it's a good start to the weekend. And Michael and I are very happy to share this. And as a filmmaker, I've spent about 30 years making films about innovations and change, and usually new models for change that benefit the planet, benefit people. But I found that while I live in New York City, I've got to get out of New York City to really see innovation take place. And it's usually in small towns. It's usually in the margins. It's usually a backyard inventor or some young woman with an idea who wants to take it to a larger audience and share it. And so in my travels, I happened upon Michael McDonough and his, I'm going to call it the Miracle Greenhouse, because I'm aware of agriculture in upstate New York. I see trees being cleared so fields can be planted or room can be made for cattle or for cows. Um, I'm aware that there is food scarcity here in New York City in certain neighborhoods that just don't have access to healthy, nutritious food. Suddenly, Michael has something that has an answer for all of this, but also does it within a framework for fighting climate change. How do we create highly nutritious food that's accessible to people where they live, but how do we do it without the tractors and the use of fossil fuels and the taking of land by the acre and thousands of acres, and in some cases turning that into a bit of a dust bowl? How do we get away from some conventional farming practices and move forward with something that works for us now? And lo and behold, in this small town of Stone Ridge, New York, on the top of a mountain where I don't imagine much growing in terms of crops, Michael has this wonderful greenhouse that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year is growing highly nutritious microgreens. He is employing people in the community, not just jobs for an agricultural season or two, it's 4 seasons. He's connected to the community, and suddenly there's a food network that he's part of. Meanwhile, he's not using any fossil fuels to heat or cool this greenhouse, like so many greenhouses out there. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a great story. This is a nice miracle, but I've got to see this. And when I saw it, I realized that Michael had the goods and this greenhouse was up and running. And while it's called Future Farm, it's a way of how we might feed the world locally and fight climate change. But that future farm is here now. And Michael has been doing all he can to run his farm and get the word out. But I said, as a filmmaker, if I can capture some of the story here and we can share that with others, people may not be able to visit his mountaintop in upstate New York, but we bring the mountain to others. They see the power of this idea, and maybe Michael is able to transfer this open source innovation that he's developed. Can he give it to the world? And so, Desmond, your venue, your opportunity today is we hope to do just that. And I will step back from most of this presentation because Michael can get into the beautiful details of it for all those of you who love science. If you want to talk film, we can do that for 2 minutes, but Michael will get into the real basics. But just to introduce this place, you can take my word for it, or you can see it in this 7-minute film that we made over the course of several days with Michael. And interestingly, when we filmed this, we filmed it in an April where it was 95 degrees out. There should have been no springtime, no bees buzzing, no plants blooming. And yet climate change was upon us, yet his greenhouse was cool and running and productive, and that said everything. So give me just a second. I'll start this 7-minute film.
Okay,
I'm going to share the screen.
yep, you should be.
Cool. Good. Let's see. Let me get this here. Okay. Share. Great. You're all able to see the screen?
Yes, we are.
Wonderful. Here we go.
I believe in this.
You need to share sound.
There's something happening.
Sound, yes.
I'm sorry?
I don't think this is the beginning.
And I realized what Michael is doing. I'm like, oh, this is big time. The microgreens are so good for you
But
because
Aaron-
they're small, it's nutrient dense.
I think we need to start over.
Is it not sharing?
It's sharing, but it's not full screen and we are not hearing the sound clearly, I don't think.
Okay,
All
so
right,
I'm just gonna
when you
go
click
over
share,
those.
when you click share, there's a button that says share sound or share
Gotcha.
computer sound.
Okay, hang on one second.
It's not at the beginning either.
Just hang on one second.
Yeah.
This is the beauty of filmmaking. All right.
Not at the beginning.
Okay, hang on one second.
Mhm.
I'm going to start the share again. Okay.
No, it's not the beginning.
You'll have to wait a second. Just want to make sure sound is on.
Why can't he see something?
I'm going to give this a second test run. Hang on one second.
Mhm.
Are you getting sound now?
I believe in this.
I'm not hearing it.
Okay.
There's something now.
That's the beauty of innovation. It takes a little bit of tinkering. Hang on one second. Cool. All right. Take 3. I think this will work.
Okay.
I believe in this. I'm part of something now. Once I start working here and I realize what Michael is doing, I'm like, oh, this is big time. The microgreens are so good for you because they're small, it's nutrient dense. Climate change is messing a lot of things up. This shit is real. We still have a chance, but we have to do something now. He's doing it.
I've created a farm that uses 10% of the energy that would normally be used in agricultural production. That is a solution that is ready to share.
We are reinventing the way we need to feed people in the future.
I'm Michael McDonough, and we are in Stone Ridge, New York, at a 30-acre farm that has a 3,000 square foot greenhouse on it. It's 96 feet long, and this can produce up to 30,000 pounds of crops in a year. Now, if I cut down every tree around me and I planted all of this conventionally, I would struggle to get 30,000 pounds of crops on an annual basis. In my career, I was utterly devoted to architecture, and then I got interested in energy. I got to a certain point and I thought, wait a minute, we're going to have to pay attention to the relationship between buildings and energy. My greenhouse here, I had to spend 10 years building it, improving it. Because if you're going to do something like farming, unless you've been a farmer, no one will listen to you. Looking at a conventional greenhouse, generally you have enormous fossil fuel energy inputs. You're going to burn propane in order to heat it, and you're going to burn electricity generally to cool it. They contribute very, very significantly to global warming and climate change. What makes this greenhouse unique is that it's absolutely carbon neutral and that it uses the minimum amount of energy possible. We use 10% of the energy that's normally required. And it all comes from either geothermal or solar. The core technology is based on the idea that I can provide heating, cooling, and dehumidification in a fresh way. Almost all the air conditioning systems in the United States are designed not to dehumidify, but to cool. 90% of the impact of temperature in North America is tied to the level of humidity. So if you remove the humidity, 90% of the energy problem of cooling goes away. I learned that groundwater, as long as it's below 58 degrees Fahrenheit, will naturally dehumidify. So I took this knowledge. Then I built two types of ducts, supply duct, return duct. What that does is it drags the humid air over a coil, and that coil has groundwater in it. For most of the time, that's enough to remove the humidity in the air. No one had ever tried it.
Like, I came here because Michael has a state-of-the-art facility that is just everything from the sunshades to the way the solar operates and the very low output of our carbon footprint and fossil fuels. And I saw that and I was like, man, he knows what's going on.
My whole thing is like you were working with Mother Nature. You know, you can't grow things and then put all this shit back into the environment, not take care of the Mother Nature that's providing it for you.
Michael's gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, and that's the only way you can really do it.
Doing it.
And he has taught us what he's learned throughout the process of it.
That's like perfect to harvest, all these guys.
It's awesome to have that when he gives us that knowledge.
That's the most valuable thing. That is doing it right.
We are fighting climate change here every day while we're growing the healthiest organic food possible, and we are making a secure local agricultural environment sustainable and creating jobs and building community at the same time.
My name is Don Forrest Layens, born and raised in New York City. 2014, I passed a sign that said Black Urban Growers Conference. And I was like, I didn't even know there was a Black Urban Growers, so I was like, I have to go. It was an awesome learning experience. Like, that was the push that made me realize, like, things are happening. Well, the nutrition aspect is a big part for me. You're getting everything you need from these microgreens. When I go out to these markets and I see Tongo Brook Farms microgreens, I look at it like proudly, because I'm like, I probably packed that thing, People are eating healthy. That's the name of the game.
The tech here in the greenhouse, I want to share it. This is a model that can be built virtually anywhere. It can be on a farm, it can be on a roof, it can be in a parking lot, it can be on a barge.
The world needs this. We need this technology. We need the philosophy behind it. It's a sense of fulfillment, that you get when you're involved in doing something that has a mission.
I would hope USDA would say, hey, this is a wonderful thing. Universities, Cornell University, for example, I'd love to see it as a teaching tool. Right now, the government of New York has a legislative mandate to offsetting the impacts of climate change. It's ready to go.
And it is that final website name, futurefarm.farm. There is a website up. Michael and I have put together just some of the basics that you saw there and a chance for people to learn more. So if you are thinking about sharing this idea with a friend or just want to show somebody, hey, saw something very interesting today, futurefarm.farm is the place to go.
All right. I think we could take a couple of questions before Michael. I know some of the questions might be answered by Michael too, but any questions for Art? Okay, Mary Ellis?
Good morning, everyone. Is this called it? Well, I don't know, no right way or wrong way. Is this organic growing?
Michael, would you like to take this?
Sure. So can you hear me, you guys?
Yes,
Yes.
we're hearing you.
Okay, but not see me, right? You can't see me?
Seeing you yet?
You are? Okay.
No, we are not.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll answer the question. You can grow organically in this system, in the greenhouse, but you don't have to. One of the things that's most important to me is supporting as many various missions in as many various communities as I can, and no two communities are the same. I recently learned that there are over 600 federally recognized indigenous American tribes, and no two are the same in terms of how they view their traditions and their communities. And so I used to say, we want to build communities, and now I think the better phraseology would be support communities, because they know more than I do, and why should I presume that I know how to build them? If they want to build community in a certain way, we're there. So if you want to go organic, absolutely. But if you want to go another way, hydroponic, you can do that.
Okay. Laurel, you have a statement, a question?
I usually do. I just wanted to, I just wanted to,
Right there.
I just wanted to comment that I've seen this 7-minute trailer many, many times. And every time I'm just smiling when I see it. And I also went on the website, which is blocked from my work computer, but I could access it on the computer that I'm on. And yes, I saw that you did mention the case study and that you're members of Brown, which I absolutely love. So Brown is the Brownfields and Reuse Opportunity Working Network. And we do have a partnership with Andrews University, one of our community partnerships. So just wanted to say I'm sitting here smiling every time I see it and a little hungry.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Mark, one question, comment, because we want to
I'd like to, oh,
transition over now to Michael. Mark?
Yes, thank you. To the question of organic, so organic, if you're not organic, you're using chemicals. Like, I don't know, that's maybe a very oversimplified question for Michael, but maybe address that. And then I'm asking, if it isn't organic, does a greenhouse help mitigate, like if, let's say you're using chemicals, are you able to control what happens to those chemicals differently than would happen on ground farms outside of a greenhouse? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. So it's important to understand that the greenhouse is essentially a box in which you can do virtually anything. You can do soil on the floor. You can do, like, the floor can be soil. I have raised beds that move. They're unique beds that I designed to maximize the amount of production in a small space. That was a sort of experimental gambit. But you could certainly grow organic as it's defined by USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. There's a lot of controversy about that.
You could grow according to real organic standards. That's another group. The original idea associated with organic as a movement was you would build healthy soil generationally, right? That was the idea. Plants start in the soil, they absorb all their nutrients from soil. And so if you build healthy soil, and actually you can make soup out of soil, it has so much nutrition in it if it's engineered correctly, right? And I'm using engineered in a very broad sense. You don't have to put chemicals in it or use complicated machinery or scientific formulas. You can engineer it by adding, by growing 3 different crops and turning them back into the soil, as in the Three Sisters in Indigenous peoples farming techniques. They have what are called first foods, that are foods that also while building healthy soils, they take medicinal properties and healing into account. So, organic is a complex term. Most of the time, people accept the USDA definition. I have 4-hour inspections at least once a year in which they check every single thing that went into that greenhouse. I have to show receipts for the sand I use in my soil, and it has as a amendment to the potting soil that we use. There's OMRI, which is used in Canada. That's another standard. So I think the most important thing is to start asking, what do I want to put into my body? And what do I want to introduce to my community? USDA, curiously, a few years ago, decided that hydroponics could be organic certified. Well, what are hydroponics? Chemicals in water. So USDA decided that chemicals in water with no soil was organic growing. There was a rebellion. A number of certifiers who were organic farmers who worked for various certification agencies refused to certify hydroponic farms. They started the Real Organic Project, which insists that you grow in soil. So not only are the definitions complicated, there's politics involved, right? There's politics involved. Now, does the greenhouse affect what you can grow relative to organics? No, not really. You could use it as a meeting house if you want. You know what I mean? It's just a building that's very energy efficient and uses sustainable technologies and reduces energy consumption by 90%. But it's basically a box with a door in it.
So, Michael, why don't you go ahead and upload your PowerPoint, and at the end we'll get another chance there.
Sure. Okay, that looks to be it.
It says that.
While he's
Hold on. I'm getting there.
Can we get that? Can we get that address again? That link for the video.
Yeah, I could.
Oh,
I could get that to you.
And will we talk more about groundwater? That came up in a meeting last night.
So let's
in the policies.
Let's have Michael do his presentation, and we could ask questions after.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I'm going to make a note about groundwater because that's a fun topic. Okay.
All right. So you ready?
I think I can get to it in the presentation adequately.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we are hearing you. You can go ahead.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We are not seeing you, but
you are. Okay, good. All right. So I'm just going to narrate this. That's okay.
Michael?
So, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you.
I don't think you can.
We cannot see you, but we are seeing your.
Yeah, but you don't have to, right? You're seeing the. seeing the slides, right?
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, you can see the slides, Desmond, right?
Yes, we are seeing the slides.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so how can we use this technology, this box with a door in it, to support or create resilient communities? So resilient here refers to climate change, right? You're going to harden your community against climate change so it can survive climate change related disasters or setbacks. And how can this box with a door in it help you do that? Okay. So what we want to do in this project, and Art mentioned it, we want to engage with businesses, organizations, and institutions to create zero carbon resilient communities. Now, let's take a look at what the challenge is here broadly, okay? More than 90% of U.S. farms are small businesses grossing less than $2. Most make no money at all, or they make less than 2% profit. So it's unsustainable. Small farming in the United States is unsustainable unless we do some intervention. And this problem has been made worse by climate change. Now, if you look on the left, you'll see this is from a few years ago, but your bankruptcy in the Midwest, the rate was up 12%. Now, if you take 12% a year bankruptcies and you multiply it times 8, you get 100% bankruptcies over the next decade or so. So it's a really bad problem. Okay. Now, what are some of the other problems that compound these challenges? So traditional local farm economies suffer from a lack of year-round dependable production due to weather and climate impacts, which in turn drive dependence on fossil fuels. Well, what does that mean? That means that if you can't grow traditionally, then yeah, because you need to compensate for weather and climate impacts, then you are driven to use fossil fuels as a quick fix. So if you have a traditional field farm, you have to use more pesticides. It's very difficult to grow organically if your field is flooded or if your crops are knocked down by high winds. And the same is true in a traditional greenhouse. You have to deal with very high heat. It's not unusual for a greenhouse to go to 120 degrees in the summer. I've had it 120 degrees before I turned my system on in January. If you get cold Canadian clear air, the solar drive, it's called, the power of the sun, is so powerful, it'll heat the box with a door in it to 120 degrees in January when it's 10 below zero outside. So how do you fix these things? Well, what we've done in the United States is we've used fossil fuels. And you can see on the left the fossil fuel costs on the farms. And you can see the rising climate impacts from agriculture. Because again, climate change needs a quick fix, throw oil at it. Okay. And pesticides, by the way, are generally derived from fossil fuels as well. So what are some of the things we can look at that are alternatives here? So we have what are called restorative practices that are used in field farms in which we try to build the health of soil. Remember, that's the underlying definition of organic. And you can have zero carbon greenhouses. Now, some people will talk about net zero energy greenhouses. Generally, they're called controlled environment agriculture, or CEA, and you control the environment inside the box, right, in various ways. So what I'm trying to do, and others are trying to do in this field, are trying to develop alternatives to fossil fuel-based farming. Since 2010, we focused on resilient local food system and these CEA or box with a door in it greenhouse. So our idea is to make production 4-season dependable, use these controlled environment greenhouses as the basis for farming, make them climate neutral, make them fueled by solar and geothermal. By the way, you can also use wind power. By the way, these are on-site alternative energies, but you can also buy them off-site. You can buy green energy from the Mohawk Valley in New York, for example, if you want, if you're in New York State. You can get a contract to buy alternative energy off-site rather than on your site. And of course, this whole system has to be financially sustainable. We can't keep going with 12 to 15% bankruptcies in small farms for more than a decade. We really learned that lesson the hard way during the pandemic, when a lot of people confronted bare supermarket shelves because the supply chains broke down during the pandemic. That really brought that lesson home. Thankfully, USDA and a number of other agencies within the US government took notice of that, and now there's support for what we're trying to do, broadly speaking. Okay, so, and I'll take, all sorts of questions on this at the end, so write them down if you want. So to loop back to organic, you can see that nowhere does it say it has to be organic. Does it make it easier to be organic? Well, sure, because you're not bankrupt. And does it make it, morally more compelling to make it organic? Sure, because you're not impacting climate change. Let me speak just very quickly to the idea that something is net zero energy. There are a lot of ways to go net zero energy, and there are out there on the internet systems that will claim that they're net zero energy. The question is, at what cost and how do they get there? So the best way to get to net zero energy is to reduce demand. So if you need less energy, then you need fewer solar panels, you need fewer geothermal wells, you need fewer wind turbines, right? So any building, no matter how bad it is, a paper bag could be net zero energy. You just have to throw hundreds of solar panels at it. We use a very small number of solar panels, and that's the sort of sliding scale that you need to be aware of. So remember, anytime you see a claim that something is net zero energy, ask how much of that is based on initial energy reduction. If the number isn't 90%, then it's not the same system that I'm doing. All right. So let's look around the world and see what other peoples in other nations are doing. So the most highly advanced greenhouses in the world are now in Israel and the Netherlands. Israel feeds most of the Mideast. A lot of people don't understand that. Most of the chickens in the Mideast come from Israel. Most of the crops that are grown in greenhouses in the Mideast are grown in Israel. So beneath all this political stuff going on, there's a complex economy that makes these countries interdependent. And it's because the Israelis are so good at greenhouse technology. So these highly advanced greenhouses are often very beautiful, very costly. They have a high first cost, and they have complex systems. They are overcome by significant government subsidies. The Netherlands in the 1970s produced some of the strictest laws in the world about energy consumption in greenhouses because they take a lot of energy. So they worked together with the government and they designed these amazing, amazing greenhouses. Same with the Israelis. And by the way, there's a huge number of greenhouses in Turkey as well. A lot of people don't realize that. They're not necessarily energy efficient, but they're all over the place. Now, how big are they? Well, mine's 3,000 square feet. It's not unusual to have them up to 175 acres. So when you ask yourself, how big do I want my greenhouse? Well, for me, in my system, 3,000 square feet is 30 by 100, more or less. That's sort of that's as small as they can get. How big can they get? 175 acres or bigger, by the way. Now, okay, so what's the problem? Why don't we just buy Israeli or Netherlandic or Dutch or Turkish greenhouses? Well, we have unique climate in North America, okay? We're as cold as Moscow. We're as warm as Cairo, and we can be more humid than Bali, Indonesia. Sometimes all in the same day, at least in the Northeast and the upper Midwest. It's not unusual to have all sorts of swings in the weather. As Mark Twain said, if you don't like the weather in New England, wait a minute. So these greenhouses, for all these reasons listed above, they don't fit well necessarily into our privatized competitive economy, and they make it difficult for us to realign our communities because we have a different sort of government than they do in these countries, other countries. Okay, so what I tried to do was radically simplify and improve upon existing controlled environment greenhouse models. And this is important. Even though Desmond noted that I specialize in advanced systems, you can't get a reliable advanced system unless you make it out of the simplest parts possible. So that's very important to understand when you're looking at a complex technology. It has to be built of simple parts. So what I tried to do was use readily available parts that I could buy on the internet. I put these parts together and I developed an innovative climate control technology. I made sure that everything was cost effective at each step, and I've spent 10 years proving that. I set the goal of saving at least 90% of year-round energy costs. So it's easy, frankly, to save energy in the early spring and the early fall because the weather isn't that extreme. You want 70 to 75 degrees with 70 to 75% humidity. That's what they have in Santa Barbara, California. That's why so many wealthy, celebrated people like to live in Santa Barbara, California, because it's got a perfect climate, except, of course, now for the extended drought, but that's climate change. And I also used United States climates as a basis for developing the system. So a lot of people would say, well, just buy the stuff from the Netherlands, but the Netherlands don't have the humidity problem. And the humidity problem is 90% of the problem. So if you don't solve that, you can't solve the problem. And it's very expensive to remove humidity, 10 times more than heating. Okay, so the idea is, in Tongo Brook Farm, where I have my farm, is in the on the mountain, as Art said, in the Mid-Hudson Valley of New York. I set out to prove that we could springboard to a zero carbon resilient community future now, that we could do it now. So we started in Roberts Creek, British Columbia, Canada in 2010 with, again, approximately 2,000 square feet, 2,880. And we farmed in soil. And we used, of course, the controlled environment greenhouse. And so we proved that that could work. Then we opened Tongo Brook Farm. And the actual startup date was 2014. I don't know why it says 2020 there. That's a glitch. And that's about 3,000. And we used raised beds instead of growing in soil. Okay, so we have dependably grown and sold tomatoes, cucumbers, flowers, lettuce, herbs, microgreens, hemp, and field starts, which are the little plants you use when you're field farming, 365 days a year for 10 years without crop loss at up to 90% energy savings using geothermal and solar energy sources, and they are all on site. Now, field starts, how many field starts can you grow? Well, in 20% of my greenhouse, I grew enough field starts to fill 200 acres. We grew hemp under a research grant from USDA and New York State. Microgreens are my main crop because they're really good for a small greenhouse. We've also done herbs, lettuces, flowers, edible flowers and decorative flowers, tomatoes and cucumbers. So some people will say, well, what can you grow in these things? I don't necessarily want to grow microgreens. Well, we've grown over 60 crops for 10 years. Okay. It's also important to understand that the technology can be transferred to new or existing buildings, and they can be resilient places to live, work, eat, and play on or off farm sites. You can do it on a brownfield. I think I said in the film, you can do it on a barge, you can do it on a parking lot, you can do it on a roof. I made sure that the technology was portable. So what I do is, as an architect, right? Because I'm an architect, so I would design what's called a turnkey design build, which means I would design the greenhouse for the crops that you want to grow, and it would be specific to your site. It would be based on your crop plan, which is where you tell me what you want to do, what you want to grow, what you want to use the greenhouse for, how many months you want to grow. I understand in Alaska, they only grow 2 or 3 months and then they go out hunting. So maybe they would need a greenhouse that could also be a meeting hall. It's extraordinarily flexible when you think about it as a box with a door. So we start with preliminary site evaluation and needs evaluation. Those are your needs. And then I would recommend the building's type and size. Take a look at the cost as they relate to your project plan, which would include financing. And when I told you that it's really important to sort of look at this as getting the simplest model possible, that's the model. It's got a round dot and it's got a square dot, and there are arrows. And basically, I take water out of the ground, and I run it through a coil that I designed with very small fans. And I figured out the proportionality where most of the year I can dehumidify the air and otherwise advantageously condition the greenhouse and reduce energy by 90%. And again, we can operate on field farms, any kind of challenging site. I built my greenhouse in a forest on a mountaintop in one of the most extreme climates in the world, because when I was studying architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, they said, you can't understand a system unless you push it to failure, and then you see what happens after it fails. You pick up the pieces and you start again. That's called multiple iteration. Right? So what we do is take the most difficult place, a forest on a mountain in an extreme climate, and that's the testing ground, right? It's easy to build a greenhouse on a flat site with no trees around it in a perfect climate like they do in Texas, right? Texas has a lot of really big greenhouses, 300,000 square feet and up. Why? Perfect climate. Well, that's okay unless you don't live in Texas. So we took on every challenge we could to make sure that we were testing it over and over and over again. And there you see one on a barge on the left. So, says who? Some people have said, yeah, you're Irish, you're probably exaggerating because an Irish fact is something you want to be true. So I said, okay, all right, fair enough. So these are our third-party validations, awards, and grants. They're on the left there. And on the right, we have data from New York State's Research and Energy Development Agency. Their technical evaluation panel is a group of engineers who are very smart and very strict. And I submitted all my data that I collected in 50,000 pages at 9-point type. And they evaluated it over a period of years. And this is what they validated. That big blue blob is the carbon dioxide impacts of a conventional greenhouse over 30 years, 51,630 pounds of CO2. If you use a grid-tied system, and you do it as efficiently as you can using, let's say, net zero, right? Because net zero is a term people like to throw around. You can cut it to 23,670 pounds of CO2 over 30 years. And if you use mine, that's the flat line on the right, it's zero. Who says is NYSERDA. And you'll see there are 3 grants in a row from NYSERDA, just below the Governor's Environmental Excellence Award from New Jersey, that they came at this 3 different times, and they validated those results. You'll also see at the top the ACEC Excellence in Building Technology Award and the National Recognition for Engineering Excellence Award. ACEC is known in the engineering community as the Academy Awards of Engineering. We won 2 of them. Not easy. All right, and then there are all the organic certifications, the hemp research, various and sundry. We're members of our local growers association, and they gave us an innovation grant. And you can see there are 4 layers of USDA certification. So if you're a farmer, an agricultural accelerator, if you're interested in resources conservation, climate resiliency, social justice, or any other similar organization, or you're an educational institution, we would love to work with you. We're actively, as I said, seeking partners in order to scale up, engage, and develop climate neutral farming, flexible supply chain, food security, community building, and job training. And there you have it.
Okay, thank you so very much, Michael. You could take down your slides for now, I think.
Let me stop the share and see if there are questions.
Yeah, so let's go to, I think Emma Kennard had a question.
Yes, I was excited about hearing all of the different things that he has to offer in his this what do you call it, unit that he has perfected for what do they call the climate control in the greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just trying to see how would that even work with if you were doing teaching, using it as a teaching tool to teach children on how to propagate um, a hardwood and herbaceous cuttings, and starting a nursery.
Well, I've had seminars in the greenhouse, and we recently added a guest house adjacent to the greenhouse. And we encourage our guests there to come in and learn how to plant. I give them about a 1-hour seminar in which they're hands-on and they're getting dirt under your fingers, which is supposedly, we just learned, actually good for your bino.
Yes.
Some beneficial effects that some of the scientists and medical experts figured out. So that's good. So they get dirt under their fingernails. And in a 1-hour seminar, you can teach them a lot. They don't need to know about the technology in the greenhouse, right? They just need to know that it's viable. And if they have an idea on how to build a community, or if they want to just learn how to plant or whatever it is, just think of it as a really efficient schoolhouse with a lot of sunshine.
Well, that's what I was looking for, is seeing you think in a community such as I don't know if you know the demographics of Benton Harbor, but we have a lot of youngsters. We had an agri-science program within the high school here, but now it's no longer existing. And I want to do that because we have already started the Fresh Start Children's Garden. It's 18 years in existence. And so now I want to sort of expand on starting a nursery by teaching the children how to propagate landscape plants. And that way you deal with the beautification of your community too.
Well, let me emphasize that if you think of this as a box, right?
Mhm.
The box can do a lot of stuff. When you purchase a system from several major manufacturers in the United States, it doesn't all have to be clear or translucent at the roof. The roof can be opaque so that you can use part of it like a normal building. So you could build a 3,000 square foot greenhouse and you could make half of it so that the sun doesn't shine directly in it, and that can be used for classrooms. Or you can use shade screens to mediate how much sun comes in. So I did one recently about 2 hours north of me. And didn't get built, unfortunately. It was tied to the economy of the pandemic. And when the pandemic stopped, the people who were going to use it decided that everyone went back to New York City and they didn't have any people to buy their props anymore. But it was an interesting exercise, and it was supported by the local county. Um, and about a third of it was not set up for growing. There were restrooms, there were packing areas, there were meeting areas, there were mechanical rooms, there were all kinds of support activities, right? So you can think of them, this, you say growing is the primary activity, but you can have a secondary activity for meetings and teaching and community outreach and so forth. So there are lots of ways to sort of mess around with the greenhouse building. Restaurants are, there are several really good restaurants in greenhouses in the US, but also around the world. In Iceland, some friends of mine visited there, and they use a hybrid growing system. They use some water like hydroponics, but it's also tied to soil production. So they've hybridized hydroponics and soil growing, and you can pick the tomato off the vine for your salad while you're sitting at the table eating. So, you know, creativity is the watchword here, super flexibility.
Michael, just one quick note. There are a few questions in the chat,
Yeah,
and I'm not sure how much time we have. I'm just wondering, should people connect with you after this?
Absolutely.
I am going to read those questions, or yeah, I'll take care of it.
Okay.
Pat Payne, you have a question in the chat. If you would like, you could unmute and ask your question. Pat? Okay, I'm not hearing from Pat. So the question is, who are some of your Midwestern clients?
Don't have any yet.
Okay.
I did visit Detroit in the 1990s. That was, and I had lunch at Checkers.
So do you have clients anywhere, not just Midwest, but
You know, in my area, in the Hudson Valley and in Canada. Those were the two places we started.
so there are farms there that are using your technology.
There was a farm in British Columbia. I don't know if they're still there. That was over, wow, that was many years ago. That was a testing farm. And then I have my farm here. Those are the only two currently in production.
So
Now I should say that just before the pandemic, I had contracts for 4, and the pandemic wiped out 10 years of work. They were all canceled.
But good things are coming now, and I think I'll just say very quickly, you met Laurel Berman earlier in this conversation, and she and her extended team at Brown have really been wonderful about sharing the greenhouse and its technology with a number of very challenged communities, Michigan, certain inner city areas, where this greenhouse can make a real difference for a local community and food sovereignty, including, I think, discussions right now with a number of Native American tribes and communities. So there was the pandemic, but there is the beautiful and sweet future that is coming now, where I hope this farm and this innovation does connect with communities that really need it.
So just to be clear, right now, apart from Michael's farm, there are no other farms that where the technology is installed and where it's being used.
That's correct. Now, part of that was because of the pandemic, but also more significantly, I had to test it for at least 10 years.
Okay.
Right? Because as I mentioned in the film, if you don't have experience in farming, it's nearly impossible to talk to farmers. I know, I tried for many years, and they would say, you don't know anything. You haven't been in my shoes. So then I started on a journey to walk in their shoes. That took a decade.
Okay.
Now I'm coming out of that decade.
It's time to reach out. And I think that's why I knew I wanted to make this film and get it out there quickly, because now more than ever the alarm bells are sounding, but there are also communities that are really trying to take control of their own destiny and have the means of production and education and employment. And to me, getting this film done and edited and getting it out in the past few months, um, I'm just amazed by, there is a real hunger for solutions like this. So anyway, those are my 2 cents.
So Eric Bradford has a question in the chat. I don't think he has a microphone, so I'll ask it. What kind of investment course would a person be looking at to get set up?
Okay, before I go to that, and I want to make it clear that the technology in the greenhouses has been tested for 10 years, and that's being introduced now. The greenhouses themselves, the building, right? The metal parts, the plastic parts, the way the crops are grown in the floors or on movable beds, those building technologies have been around for decades, right? So I don't invent the metal arches that hold the roof up. I go to companies that have been in business for 10 or 20 years. And the ductwork in the greenhouses has been around for over 100 years. The machines that I've used have been around for decades. So what I did was I took time-tested technologies out of the normal context in which they're used, and I recombined them in a unique way. So I don't want you to think that no one's ever built the Harnois greenhouse system that I use for this one here. They've been around for the better part of 100 years.
So Michael, to be very specific, then what you are offering is a technology that reduces humidity. Is that correct?
By 90%, yeah.
90%.
Yeah.
And everything else that goes along with the greenhouse, a person interested would have to purchase that. They would have to get the builders and everything.
No. As the architect, I would specify and oversee and observe the construction of the greenhouse. So if you said, I want to grow woody plants, I would go out and I would find the best company that makes the best box with the door on it, right? And pick the box and the door. And then I would pick the covering with whoever wanted it to optimize how the plants would grow best. And then I would pick the best shade screen or energy screen and so forth. So you could almost think of this as a pull-down menu on your computer in which you're choosing your crop, and then everything is designed back to how to make that crop grow best. So that's my 10 years of farming experience and my ability to work with manufacturers, right? Because I've been an architect all over the world for 50 years. So to me, this is a building, it's a kit of parts that has an innovative energy saving technology in it. And I just happen to know a lot about farming because I spent over 20,000 hours learning how to do it over the last 10 years.
So with respect to Eric's question, could you give us some sort of idea of the
cost? Right. Okay. So that depends on a lot of things. And I'm not trying to be evasive, but if you want to grow one crop over another, it can have very significant impact based on where you are. If you're trying to grow roses in Alaska, it's going to be very expensive, right? If you want to grow herbs in the Midwest, not so expensive. So they generally run the same cost as a hydroponic greenhouse, which is around $150 a square foot. But there are contingencies, right? Is the site flat, or do you have to bring in machines to make it flat? Do you want to use geothermal wells, or is your immediate environment in your community not good for geothermal wells? Maybe they're too expensive. Maybe you want to do more solar panels. Maybe you want to do a different type of heat pump. So there are many, many variations on how to get to the optimal technology for performance. Most of my innovation was how to improve the overall building by making it more airtight and how to optimize the systems using advanced theories about how energy moves through buildings and the simplest parts possible. So there's another formula, by the way, that says you have to look at how much money your greenhouse makes per square foot on an annual basis. So let's say you want to grow string beans and you can make $150 a square foot if you produce 12 months of the year. And let's say the greenhouse at your location to grow those string beans costs $150 a square foot. That's considered, and people who do this for New York State, who evaluate the investment profile of any agricultural technology, they tell me that's the sweet spot. So when you do your crop plan, if you want to grow crops where you can't make any money because there's no market for them, then you're going to have a challenge. Now, you may have a subsidy where you're teaching as well as growing. That's a different economic proposition. So there are a lot of different answers to that question. It's like, how much does a car cost? How much does a house cost? It depends, right? But they can be answered once you start digging down into what you want it for.
And here, let's see, Laverne, is it Laverne Prime? Do you want to?
Oh, hello.
Yes, Laverne.
Lavon, yes, it's Lavon. That's the question. Two questions I sent in there. I thought you all could have heard me. I thought my mic was giving trouble, but you can go ahead with the question.
Go ahead, ask your question.
It's in the chat. I typed it in the chat because I thought my mic was giving trouble.
Yeah, so we are hearing you. If you want, you could go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay. The first question was, I'm from the Caribbean. It is a known fact that the greenhouse method is very expensive to set up and more expensive even to maintain, especially where the humidity is concerned. Is there modification, or are there modifications could be made to your method of greenhouse setup to suit the Caribbean region? Because we just have two systems of weather, dry and wet.
Yeah. So yeah, the answer is yes. And you know, as an architect, right? Architect from the Greek means master builder. So what you have to do is you have to look at that as the design problem the way you would look at any building. So the answer is yes. It depends on what you want to grow. It depends on the site, certainly depends on the local climate and so forth and so on. So in the Caribbean, for parts of the year, you might not get your 90% goal. Maybe it's 80% energy savings, but other parts of the year, you may get to 95% energy savings. Each site is different. And it's very important to understand that. There's a saying in the green technology community that goes, all sustainable energy is local. So sustainable energy systems that work in Maine probably wouldn't work in the Caribbean. The energy systems used in the Netherlands don't necessarily work in Detroit, right? So that's why you need the architect who's been doing it for 10 years.
Okay.
The other part, I forgot to tell you, would shade cloth, what do you call it, shade system be easier for us or better?
It would be very, very good with the following footnote. Shade screens are not all the same.
Right.
Right. And they're also called energy screens, right? So they're basically usually a metallicized plastic, and they're manufactured in ways that are specific to the crops you grow. So I use a shade screen that's optimized to save energy while growing greens. You could get a shade screen. And by the way, the plastic coverings on the greenhouses also are adjusted for what you want to grow. Some of them are red, by the way, because like if you're growing hemp, you want more red spectrum. So they actually change the color of the plastic. They also change what light spectrum is emitted through the plastic. And it's the same for the shade screen. So there, you need to be really careful about what you're buying, and you need to work with the company that manufactures the shade screens, because not all of them do manufacture to those exacting standards. So you need to find someone who will use shade screens that are adaptable to the crops that you're growing. Now, I use two, one on the inside and one on the outside. In the summer, I need two. I need both inside and outside. In the winter, I need one inside. And some of the time I don't need that. But if it's a clear day like we have today, I have to close the shade screen because the amount of solar energy that goes in there will make the environment too hot. And as I said, I have to sometimes close the shade screen in January. So lots of moving parts, all after one thing. How do you grow your crops best? That's the question you start with. What are my crops? What are my activities? How do I do it best? It's like customizing a car.
So we have another question from Mary Alice. I don't know if she's still on, but
I'm here.
okay. So Mary Alice, you want to ask that question about does he help with the setup?
Yes, and that's excuse me, basically what I want to know if in fact you go into different communities and help with setups of the greenhouses. I listened to you and I'm reminded of, gosh, it's been every bit of probably 22 years now that I've been trying to get Manchester Bidwell Arts and Training Technology Center in here. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mr. Bill Strickland. They became sustainable growing orchids in their greenhouse, selling them all over the world. And we got to keep that in mind as well. It's one thing, you know, if we're growing for ourselves or for the community as a whole, but to how do we become sustainable in helping this thing to run and being able to pay people, you know, employees and that type of thing.
So the
Right.
question,
So that's the economic financial feasibility part of the equation. So
yes, but do you help?
sure, sure, to the extent that I can. So remember that an architect is a generalist, right? And what the architect does is form a team. So let's say I'm making a film and I'm a producer, like Art, right? And sometimes Art is the producer and the director. But sometimes Art says, nah, this is too specialized. I need to get a director who's worked in this area before. And then Art gets a film editor, and then he gets a sound editor, and so forth. Or on some films, maybe he shoots them on his camera and he does all of them. all those jobs, right? So the architect is very similar to a film producer. And what you have to do is build teams, just like you do making a movie.
So, so let me just kind of clarify again. So you do help in the setup to whatever degree is possible. How about also a long-term like guidance? Because as you mentioned before, there are lots of moving parts. What does that look like? Do you help beyond the setup?
Yes. So that's actually when I started this project, there were a lot of people who came by and they were experts in the economics of growing. And one guy said, "Oh, you should just sell consulting services, right?" So I said, "Well, I'm not going to do only that, but certainly you can have an ongoing relationship on a consulting basis. Or we work together where I do the initial consulting and we build a local team that we train. And then maybe that team is on the ground where you are, they're from your community. You can go have lunch with them or have a cup of coffee with them, look them in the eye. And then maybe I check in once a week or once a month or whatever is necessary. But again, it's the same with any project an architect does. Sometimes there's follow-up. You have to go through an initial, what's called commissioning process. There's a word for it. You commission the building and you make sure it operates properly and its systems operate properly, and then you go from there.
Okay. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Michael and Art. This is a compelling, very compelling, passionate presentation and topic. And so, Mike, I have a couple of questions back to your presentation, Michael. You said up to 90% energy savings. Could you unpack that? Like, is there a range that we're looking at, or other ways of looking at that when you're using solar and geothermal?
Okay, so again, it depends on the climate. In British Columbia, right? They have what I call the dinosaur climate, right? And that's what we have everywhere from, say, Humboldt County, well up into British Columbia, past Vancouver. And that is where you have dry summers and wet winters. Now, there, because we were growing tomatoes and cucumbers, we had different challenges to what we had here in the Northeast. So you could look at it on an annualized basis. Each year, the average energy savings is 90%. But if you're growing orchids, to go back to the other example we were talking about, you may need what's called a hothouse environment where you need more humidity. So if you're in Vancouver in the dry season and you're trying to grow orchids, you may have to have additional machines. You may have to have humidifiers because you're fighting extremely low humidity. You can get, I mean, ASHRAE is the name of the organization that engineers rely on for standards. And for example, if you have 20% humidity in a building, your eyeballs start to crack because your body really, really suffers in low relative humidity depending on the temperature. So, I would say the worst case under the worst possible environmental challenges would be maybe 50%. But
Thank you.
We've been around 90 for 10 years.
Yeah, I have another question. In your presentation, you said I take water out of the ground. Are you talking about well
Oh,
water?
yeah, the groundwater. Okay. So, the best way to achieve dehumidification is if you have groundwater that's 58 degrees Fahrenheit or lower during the high humidity season. And how do you tell what the temperature in the ground is? Well, it's the average temperature in your area on an annual basis. So in New York State, the average temperature annually is about 55 degrees. So that means the groundwater in most of the state is 55 degrees. And what that means is by simply pumping groundwater with small pumps They're smaller than a loaf of bread, about the size of a small cantaloupe. Those pumps are sufficient to dehumidify the building. Now, remember, if you put in a dehumidifier, right, a separate machine, it costs up to 10 times more than heating the building. But I do it by pumping groundwater with a couple of pumps the size of a cantaloupe through a coil that I developed and through ductwork that I arranged in specific ways. Now, when I first did these, a lot of these technologies were experimental. No one had ever worked with them. My contribution was, instead of studying it on paper, I built it. Then my contribution was, I, stepped into the lion's den and risked everything financially and professionally to experiment with it, growing for 10 years. So that's how I got where I am, and that's where those numbers come from. So groundwater is a resource. Now, it's very important to understand something. No groundwater is consumed. It simply goes in a loop. And let's say it's 59 degrees instead of 58 degrees. Then I have a super efficient heat pump. Some of you people on the call here may have heard about mini splits. That's a thing that a lot of states underwrite. Well, a mini split uses a heat pump. And a heat pump is a very, very efficient means of moving energy around and making things warmer or cooler in a very efficient way. Most of them are running on electricity, and they can run on off of solar panels or wind power, or they can be grid tied. So you take the most energy efficient technology and you use it to cool that water 1 degree, which doesn't take a lot of energy. And then you're back to using the groundwater. But you don't consume the groundwater. So how could you imagine that works? Okay, think of a garden hose with water in it, and you have a pump attached to it, and the garden hose goes in a circle, right? The water's going around in a circle in the garden hose. None of it is being used. And then you say, well, how do you transfer that energy? Well, you put your hand on the garden hose, right? There's a technology that does that basically the technology puts its hand on the garden hose. So if the temperature in the garden hose is really cold, your hand's going to get cold. And if the temperature in the garden hose is really hot, your hand's going to get hot. That's how simple this technology is. And the thing that strikes me is no one ever thought of it. I was not trained as a mechanical engineer. I have an art background, I have an architecture background, a writing background, and so I'm a poet, a published poet. So there's also a musician. So I've learned to think outside the box my whole life, right? I don't think like an engineer. Most engineers are trained to specify machines. I talk to physicists and ask them, how does energy move around? And what's the most efficient way to move energy around? Well, it turns out water is the most energy efficient way to move energy around. Just dumb old water. And so basically what I've got is a couple of garden hoses. One goes in the ground and the other one goes in the greenhouse. And in the middle is my hand. And I can transfer that energy from one garden hose to the other. I can make one garden, or I can press the two garden hoses together, and the place where they meet is where they transfer. That's how basic this is, but no one ever thought of it.
So
Can I ask one follow-up question, Desmond?
Please. It's now 10:58, top of the hour. You could definitely follow up with Michael offline because we got to take off here. But we want to thank our presenters, Mark, sorry, not Mark, Art and Michael for a very clear presentation. We want to thank all of our participants, attendees here today. Hopefully we all learned something about greenhouse technology that allows for 90% energy conservation. So we want to thank you guys, and hopefully everyone has a wonderful weekend. Next week, as I said before, next week we'll have a chief from the Caribbean First Peoples, and hope to see you guys next week. Take care, everyone.
Enjoyed you, Michael. Enjoyed you very well. There's something so powerful about things being different and disruptive. It changes the world we live in today for the future, and I cannot wait to hear more from you. Thank you, Dr. Murray, for this yet another fantastic episode of Environmental Fridays.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Desmond. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.